registrazione, prego.
Okay, so right now the European legislation of food safety is much simpler than it was up to 2006, when it was spread all over a number of directives. It was there were 17 directives for the most general subjects regarding hygiene, safety, and it was quite a mess, because every directive has to be implemented by the member states through national legislation. And this has brought to a number of obstacles to the free trade within the internal market. That's why in 2020, the president of the European Commission at that time was Romano Prodi, launched a white book for food safety, where it was provided to reform the structure of the European legislation, with a main focus on food safety as a prerequisite for every activity and trading regarding food and feed. And this was because the previous regime didn't work so well when a series of food crises happened in the late 90s, crises like the mad cow disease, on dioxins on potatoes that contaminated also the animal derived food and so on. So after the white paper on food safety in year 2000, the first outcome of the white paper has been the General Food Law, Regulation EC number 17802, where all the basic principles in terms of food safety are established, and it is still to be considered as a kind of Grundgesetz, as a kind of constitution of the European food law. After the General Food Law, then the hygiene package, that was a set of regulation dealing with the main requirements on food and feed safety all over the supply chains, was published in 2004. You can skip to the next slide, Andrea. And so we now have two main regulations that are Hygiene 1 and Hygiene 2. Hygiene 1 provides us with the general framework of hygiene rules to be applied all over the food chain by every kind of operator. And it was not recently, but 3 years ago, was amended through regulation 1382 year 2021, about which we have written a few articles on our website, that is greatitalianfoodtrade.it, that is also translated automatically translated in 10 languages. And if you look for Hygiene 1 or look for 1382 in the search area of the website, you will find the news that were introduced in that year to the Hygiene 1 regulation. The Hygiene 1 regulation defines, as I said, the general requirements. It is a kind of a framework regulation where you can find the definitions of food hygiene, the clarification about responsibilities of each operator within the food supply chain. And you will find general and specific requirements for either the primary production and the operators following the agricultural primary productions. Whereas hygiene and the novelty introduced in 2021 focused on the importance of food safety culture. The approach of the European legislation over the years shifted from a police-based approach, where the public officials were controlling the respect of a huge series of requisites to be implemented by the operators on terribly long checklists that resulted not to be so efficient in terms of a guarantee to the food safety, up to another system that is based on the self-regulation and precisely on the self-control. So according to the modern European food law, the first responsible of food safety is the food operator. And no one better than the food operator ought to understand which are the most relevant risks that may hamper the safety of its processes and its products. And for this reason, the main resource and also the object of either of self-control and of official controls is a food safety manual called that is usually made of two parts. One is a manual of prerequisites or good manufacturing practices, good hygienic practices, or good agricultural practices, depending on the role of the single operator. And a second part that is the implementation of monitoring and prevention, control, prevention, and corrective actions related to the specific critical points that are detected through proper analysis of the fluxes of goods and all over the process, from the entry of raw materials into the establishment up to the delivery to the final consumers. Hygiene 2 is the second main regulation of the hygiene package that provides further rules that are specific for the operators who deal with food of animal origin, not also composite foods, meaning foods that are made of either unprocessed foods of vegetable origin and processed food of animal origin. Let's say a composite food, for example, is pizza, because it contains wheat flour, it contains olive oil, it contains tomatoes, but it contains also cheese that is a finished product of animal origin. So the Hygiene 2 regulation applies only to the operations that are in the food of animal origin sector, like a slaughterhouse, like meat industry, like milk industry, and so on. Then there is a third regulation that has been recently amended regarding the official controls of products of animal origin. Then we got the Killer Directive that introduced amended, that cancelled all the previous directives, and then the official controls regulation that was firstly established in this 882/2004 that was amended in 2017 by means of regulation 625. We can slip to the next directive.
Yes, Dario, I just only wanted to add one thing about what you said before. The regulation 2021-1382 also had provisions about allergens.
Right.
For business operators, so that they have to comply to specific provisions in order to avoid cross contact between allergens and adopt specific practice in order to avoid these problems within the food production, the process of food production. Sorry. And also provisions on redistribution of food, whether it may be destined to food waste, since someone before said that he's working about prevention of waste. There is also prevention of food waste. And on this, the Commission published the first one in 2016, but the latest one, which is updated according to this regulation, specific guidance which supports food business operators and also competent authorities to follow and respect the provisions of the general the food hygiene regulation.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome.
So skip to the next slide. Then we go microbiological criteria that has also to be kept in mind. That is regulation 2073 year 2005. And the microbiological criteria regulation also helped to solve a number of issues related to the free circulation of goods within the internal market, because before that there were differences in tolerance of certain pathogen bacteria from country to another. And this problem has been at least solved on the main pathogens that are provided in this regulation with the relevant thresholds. And then lots of European Commission's guidelines followed either on the general food law as regards to food operators' responsibilities, importers' responsibilities, food safety management, and also on products of animal origins and HACCP, so hazard analysis and critical control points implementation by small and medium enterprises. Unfortunately, the HACCP system was introduced in the in year 82 or 83 in the Codex Alimentarius, and in 94 in the first hygiene directive. But still, after 30 years from its introduction in the European food law, the HACCP notion and its practical implementation is still far from being acknowledged by a wide majority of micro enterprises that are the basis of our food supply chain in the local districts, as well as the widest majority of canteens and food catering premises and so on, except for the fast food chains. And for this reason, the European Commission every 3 or 4 years publishes new guidelines where it tries to simplify the notions, but it doesn't really simplify anything. If not by clarifying that the implementation of hygiene prerequisites, so hygiene good practices, is the basic requirements for micro enterprises, and that simply even these enterprises, even without implementing a proper HACCP manual, ought to acknowledge which are the main risks for food safety in the specific activities, and how to control, how to prevent, and how to mitigate. That's in brief the content of the latest European Commission guidelines, despite its complexity that is not definitely not consumers nor user friendly. We can go to the next slide, please. And the objective of this set of rules is, in the first place, to ensure human and animal health with a high level of protection that is being guaranteed not just by the rules themselves, but especially by the proper enforcement, and in particular by the food safety management networks that are established either at national, at the European level. But also consumer interest protection, including good commercial practices and free circulation of goods that are theoretically the first pillar of the European Union. Theoretically, because in fact there are still some areas of the European food law where the harmonization is not properly working, to the point that free circulation is seriously hampered, for example, in the food supplement sectors, and foods for specific purposes, like food for medical purposes, or FSG. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And the operator's primary responsibilities is one of the basic notions that have to be considered by everyone, because we have to consider that every operator all over the food supply chain is responsible for guaranteeing the safety of his process, and the product it deals with, or the raw materials it deals with, from point A when he receives the goods to point B when he sells the goods, or when he delivers the goods. And in order to let the official controls authorities understand and check and verify the proper implementation of food safety requirement by every operators, traceability system was traceability principle was made clear. It existed already in the hygiene directive 4393, but it was the traceability principle was made clearer in Article 18 of the General Food Law. And this principle provides that every operator must register the goods that have entered into his establishment, and so when which goods have been received from which operator, and when the final or even the same goods, in case of a simple trader, have been delivered to another operator. So there is a system which still requires, for the generality of food and feed, still requires quite intensive research activity by the official controls authorities, because they have to go to every operator in order to get their traceability registers and go back until they find the first that was responsible for lack of safety in case of a food safety crisis, as well as they have to go, they have to follow the traceability registers in order to reach at least the final distributor, like the retailer who provided the goods to the final consumers. But the traceability doesn't cover also the consumer stage, for obvious privacy and reasons, and also for feasibility that wouldn't exist in case we ought to register also the names of those who buy everyday food. And this is the general traceability rule provided by General Food Law Article 18. Then there are more advanced systems of traceability that are provided for specific categories of goods. That is, like is the case of bovine meats, where since year 2000, Regulation 1760 and 1875 provided a traceability system that I called a passport system, because within every stage of the supply chain, every operator working on the meat product has to keep an information regarding its operation, and this information is accompanies the product up to down to the final consumers. Okay, we can go further. There's another novelty of the hygiene package in respect to the previous discipline, that is finally and eventually the integration, the consideration of primary production as a substantial part of the supply chain, where food safety issues might arise and must therefore be considered. It looks crazy, but before the hygiene package, even the notion of hygiene started from the first phase following the primary production. Not by chance, either the dioxin and the mad cow disease crisis were originated in primary production stage. So nowadays we have a discipline that is integrated starting from the primary production, despite the hygiene requirements in the primary production are still softer, simplified by comparison to those who must be followed in the next stages of the supply chain, to the point that the HSSF is not provided in agriculture nor in breeding, despite it would be useful to have at least a proper knowledge of certain microbiological, biological, but also chemical risks that might often occur in that stage of the supply chain. Okay, we can go. And another principle that is consistent with the responsibility of all operators is the stable to table or farm to fork approach. We've been listening so many times over the last months about the farm to fork policy that was introduced by the European Commission at the beginning of the Ursula von der Leyen's activities. The Farm to Fork strategy actually provided a set of measures that were aimed to implement and to improve the characteristics of the food supply chains in terms of sustainable development. Sustainable development, greening, and reduction of pesticides, and let's say hopefully also simplification of the rules. In fact, almost nothing out of that has taken place because of strong oppositions from the conservative, but also from the socialists and democrats in the European Parliament under the pressure of the great agricultural confederations that have been that are still even today the European Parliament pushing for the whitening of either the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy. But apart from that, the stable to table or farm to fork approach was introduced 20 years ago, 24 years ago, as a general principle in order to highlight the need of a cooperation between among all the actors joining the food chain. And this cooperation is furthermore important when food safety crisis, of course, because in that case, the sooner you understand where the crisis originated, and the sooner you are able to withdraw the products that are risky from a public health perspective, the better it is for the community. And in order to making this possible, the hygiene package introduced the principle according to which all operators within the food chain and the feed chain must be registered at the competent authorities. Before that time, operators weren't always registered, and there was a huge variety of discipline at national levels. So in Italy, for example, there were already strict procedures for that, whereas in other countries like in England or in Ireland, it wasn't the rules weren't so strict, and the result of this has been the impossibility to trace back and to monitor the occurrence of food safety risks in the mad cow disease and in the dioxin prices that happened before these rules were implemented. Then, as I said, there are general and specific hygiene requirements. Oh, one step back. All operators must be registered either as food producers and as feed producers, or suppliers of the feed industry. For example, many food industries produce food, but some of the sub-products or co-products or byproducts are sold to the feed industry. And in this case, they have to be registered on two different registers, one as food producers and the second as suppliers of feed raw materials. HSSF, I told you roughly what it's about, and I guess most of you know even better than me how to implement an HSSF system within a food enterprise. Or also, and always keeping in mind that the most important thing is not just to implement a manual that was published by a trade association of an industry sector, but every kind of manual or ready-made document has to be adapted to the concrete, to the factual situation of the single enterprise, its processes, its products, and its risks that might vary consistently from a country to another, from size of enterprise to another, from the complexity of the organization, from the characteristics of the raw materials and of the final products, the temperatures of conservation, and so on and so on. Microbiological criteria, best practices are in fact those aids that are supplied by trade organizations, and the European Commission has a register that is publicly available on its websites, where you can find hundreds of examples of best practices for the single phases of single supply chains and so on. Microbiological criteria have also to be considered, and as I anticipated, there is a regulation that is 2073/05 providing unique criteria for the main pathogens, whereas for the other pathogens that are not considered in that regulation, operators as well as authorities tend to apply the risk evaluation as a first method and criteria on which to base their activities, either in prevention and in corrective actions related to possible food safety crisis. And I make the example, for example, of botulinum. Botulinum is not one of the pathogens provided in the microbiological criteria regulation, but it's a killer. It's a human killer, and its tolerance is zero, according to well-established practices and scientific consensus worldwide. Temperature checks were introduced as criteria to be further developed in a new ad hoc European regulation, but this never happened in the 20 years that followed the hygiene package. Okay, skip that and see the definition of hygiene. What is hygiene? Measures and conditions that are necessary to control hazards and to ensure fitness for human consumption of a foodstuff. In this definition, you find all the principles on which the European food law is based. Measures and conditions that have to be taken into consideration by every operator within the food and also feed supply chain in order to guarantee the safety of the product. And the safety of the product in case of food means the fitness for human consumption. And in this regard, there's an article of Article 14 of the General Food Law, and also Article 2 of the Official Controls Regulation 2017-625 that make clear what is food to be considered as safe for human consumption. The food that is safe for human consumption does not hamper consumers' health, either in immediate and in the medium, long term, and also considering the possible effects on the health of the descendants, meaning that, for example, genotoxicity is not compatible. The genotoxicity of a food ingredient or a food additive is not compatible to the food safety. Despite this, there's still quite a lot of controversy around the food safety evaluation of regarding certain food additives in particular. If you look at at our website, greatitalianfoodtrade.it, for example, you can see last week we published a recent article about silly dioxide that is probably carcinogenic and mutagen, as well as emulsifiers have been recently object of rather critical food safety evaluation by the ANSES, by the French Agency for Food Safety. And this explains to us how uneasy it is to shift from general principle to its proper implementation on the general market, and the complexity of the procedures that are never enough ready to intervene on food safety issues that are at stake. Even in the case, for example, of preservatives that are used in the meat preparations and in the meat-based products, like, for example, the sulfites, but also other preservatives that are still not the sulfites, nitrates, that are still a problem also according to European Food Safety Authority, because of a high level of intake, so a high level of exposure for the general population in the European Union, and still the thresholds for use of nitrates and nitrates in meat-based products are relatively high and mostly unchanged, despite something is going on. But it will take time. And the intended use of a food is also relevant, and this will be relevant, as we will see, also in case of upcycling food products, food byproducts, because the microbiological contamination can at least be seriously mitigated, for example, by thermal processes. Okay, we can go on. Flexibility is another concept that can be applied in many areas of the food European food law, because, as I anticipated, this set of rules is a set of general principles that have to be implemented and respected by an extremely huge variety of enterprises. And to this end, it is recurrent in this legislation to find expressions like if necessary, if appropriate, if adequate, if sufficient, meaning that the self-control, the risk analysis, starting from the perspective of the food operator, ought to guide the decision on where to implement certain measures or not. Okay. Primary products that, as I said, make a difference because they are still subject to a much lighter set of requirements, starting from the food safety requirements, include either the natural ones, the stock farm ones, the hunting and the fishing ones. Okay. And primary production is, let's say, the farmers and breeders and fishers and hunters activity. Okay. Then okay, we can go on and still go on. Okay. Here you can, here you find the basic requirements provided in the hygiene 1 regulation. So the basic requirements either at the primary production stage are protection against contamination, cleanliness, water use, phytosanitary and veterinary products. And as for phytosanitary products, we remember the farmers have to keep a register of the treatments with pesticides they make every time. And this register is now going to be implemented from the physical to the digital stage. It will take some months, but the time has come. Whereas the veterinary register has been already digitalized since 2017 in Italy. Always guides for hygiene practice are being applied all over the place. Okay, you can go. Whereas in the phases that are that follow the primary production, there's no more reference just to the good practices, but also to the HSSF-based procedures. Despite, as I told, the European Commission provides also the chance of using the best practices, so the so-called prerequisites manuals as a basis to be added with the consideration of at least the major risks of every activity. And always, and this is an example of flexibility, either documents and records to be kept are proportionate to the complexity of the organization and the nature of the nature and the levels of risk, especially of the activities that are in place. Okay. Training is one of the most important aspects in order to guarantee food safety, and it's still unfortunately pretty poor especially in micro enterprises, except for those who are working in the animal production, because they are subject to the specific rules of hygiene too. So they work in the white chamber. They're subject to veterinary controls that, at least in Italy, are very tight. Okay. One of the principal news of the hygiene package, as I said, and before the hygiene package of the general food law is the provision that all operators must be at least registered, whereas those that must have their establishment approved by the public authorities after an inspection of the same control authorities are those who work in the animal production, as well as those who provide, those who prepare food for specific groups. And according to member states' legislation, even the producers of food supplements and the producers of foods with the addition of nutrients and other substances like vitamins and minerals are also can be also subject to authorization instead of registration upon national legislation. For example, in Italy, all food supplements and all foods with additional nutrients and micronutrients producers must be approved. Then also shops must be registered, brokers and importers, and the regulation itself, the Hygiene 1 regulation, clarifies that the approval cannot be given without a preliminary control on site. Okay. Again, the good practices manuals and the trade associations' role in helping the constituencies, the members to better implement and to the safety procedure. Okay. Derogations, and let's go on. About the Hygiene 2, about Hygiene 2 regulation, as I said, is not applicable to the operators who work with composite products like pizza and frozen and ready-to-eat foods made of already prepared food of animal origins and food of vegetable origins. And it applies, therefore, only to those operators who deal with the food of animal origin, those who manufacture the food of animal origin, from the slaughterhouse to the enterprise who just slices ham, for example. The only excluded activities, and this is very important, is the retail and also small quantity supply, direct supply, like local markets and domestic private use, with the attention on the word domestic. That means family and not just friends and others, as regards to slaughtering animals, for example, in Italy. Okay. These are the unprocessed products. Okay. These are the processed ones. We go on. And here is the definition of composite products, composite products, as I told. Okay. This is it. The specific further requirements provided by Hygiene 2 regulation include the factory registration mark or the health mark that have both to be issued by the veterinarians, and the second, the health mark, is the one provided now only for bovine meats and for fresh meats. There is a provision of information, as I already said, on either on live animals and the treatments that these animals, the veterinary treatments, the veterinary medicine they have received during their lives, and then also and this information has to be brought to and delivered to the abattoir or the slaughterhouse. Then and from there over, the traceability is, as I said, quite stricter. Okay. The approval is required, as already said, for these kinds of operators. Okay. And there are other rules, of which one of the most interesting for not just for veterinaries but also for ordinary consumers is the notion of mechanically separated or mechanically extracted meat that is provided exactly in this hygiene 2 regulation. If we all knew what is mechanically separated or mechanically extracted meat, I believe the sale of Wüsters and other ready-to-eat products containing those ingredients will dramatically reduce. Okay. Okay. The microbiological criteria obviously provide that all food operators are obliged to comply with these criteria that are relevant for food safety, for the microbiological safety of foods. And in order to doing so, the food operators have to perform tests and taking samples and analysis, and in order to check the conformity of the products and to the criteria, and also to implement corrective actions in case the criteria are not addressed. Corrective actions do not only mean to throw the contaminated products in the bin, not to incinerate them, but also to use thermal treatments in order to inactivate certain pathogens where there are thermoresistant, where they are not thermoresistant, and also it can the corrective action can take the form of a different destiny of the product, either for feed rather than food, or for other uses. Okay. There's a main difference between product criteria and process criteria, because product criteria define the acceptability of the product, and it can only be applied to the finished product, because and it has to be checked all over the shelf life that is provided voluntarily by the responsible operator, who has the role to also to define the expiration date or the use by date of the food he places on the market. Whereas the process criteria only define the acceptability of the process, and they are applied only during the productive process. It still happens sometimes to see control authorities making samples and performing analysis for process criteria on final products, and this is an error, and this doesn't mean anything as for the safety of the final product. because, for example, Escherichia coli, which is, or Campylobacter, that are two of the most common pathogens, can be easily inactivated by a proper cooking of meat product. And so even when their presence is found within the production place, but before the thermal process to which the products, the meat products, are subject, this apparent non-compliance has no significance. Okay. Here are the microbiological criteria defined by Regulation 2073. Okay. And the food chain information that the breeders have to bring to the abattoir, the slaughterhouse, and that are necessary in order to guarantee the healthiness of the animals before the transformation into food products. Okay. Okay, we can go on. And I would say, okay, go. Right, this is a reference to the small and medium enterprises that, as I already said, are subject to flexibility. Okay. And here you find the roots of the new era of European food law. The so-called allergens directive was then implemented within the Food Information to Consumers Regulation 1169 year 2011, whereas the official controls regulation has been amended by the following 625 year 2017, and a food contact materials regulation 193504, which is of great relevance, can be considered as a, let's say, as a brother of the little brother of the general food law, providing similar criteria in order to guarantee the safety of every kind of materials or object that are in contact with food, either kitchen utensils and food containers, and materials that are used for both uses. But still, after 20 years, that regulation, the food contact materials regulation, hasn't been implemented for the widest majority of materials that are used in food utensils and containers, except for plastics. And today there's a huge problem of food safety related to food contact materials, either in the plastic sector, and I make a specific reference to some substances like the PFAS, the perfluoroalkyl substances, like many others that are recognized officially as endocrine disruptors, which are still used in plastic bottles and many other food containers, as well as there are problems with the certain types of inks, with metals, with all the materials that have been regulated only at national levels. And if you look for food safe for food contact materials on the Great Italian Food Trade website, you will find quite a few articles. Also useful in order to see where the European Commission and the European legislator hasn't reached yet a proper level of guarantee of safety on these products. The JRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, has somehow tried to fill the gap by providing extensive guidelines to the official controls authorities in order to let them check the safety of these materials, even beyond the poor requisites of the general regulation, or let's say the two general requisites of the FCM regulations. And then another regulation that is of great relevance in the food safety sector is the 39605 on about maximum residue levels of pesticides, of particular relevance because even these days, today in Brussels, there was this morning a massive protest of farmers in Rue de la Loi and in Place Luxembourg, where the European Commission and the European Parliament have their headquarters, respectively. One of the arguments of the protesters is the double standard that is still in place as regards to the food safety requirements provided for food products that are produced in Europe and those who are that are imported from third countries. Actually, they ought to follow the same requisites, and this is provided by Articles 11 and 12 of the General Food Law. So same level of food safety ought to be guaranteed either on foods that are produced in Europe and exported to third countries, and to foods that are produced in third countries and imported into Europe. But indeed, if you look at the implementation acts of this regulation 39605, you will find that there is still a level of acceptance of the presence of residues of pesticides that are banned in Europe when the presence is found in fruits and veggies or cereals or other products from third countries. And this is one of the issues at stake within the protests, and it is also related to the free trade agreements that have been made between the European Union on one side and many other countries, starting from the Mercosur countries. This is one of the agreements with more problems from this point of view, but also the agreement with Indonesia that is going to be defined in the next years probably, and some others. The agreement with Canada, and one of the protests in Italy is related to the presence of glyphosate in much higher quantities on grains cultivated in Canada or the United States rather than those cultivated in the south of Italy or in other Mediterranean countries, because indeed there is a ban in Europe to use glyphosate after harvest, whereas it is currently used after harvest with the specific purpose of drying wet harvests in cold and wet countries like the Saskatchewan plain is in Canada. Okay, and this was, I would say, a preliminary introduction to the food and feed safety that is of extreme importance when we think and at how to reduce food waste or food loss, and how to transform and to upcycle food byproducts into new foods, because all these rules are always to be precisely kept in mind. Is there any question about what we just shared?
Now, Dario has spoken about the requirements of general food law and food hygiene, the hygiene package. So the requirements that are needed to be complied with in order to produce and market food which is compliant with safety requirements. Now we'll talk about what happens when products of animal origin are excluded from the food supply chain. Or to better say, what are the conditions that have to be complied with in order that products of animal origin may be considered food or animal byproducts. To start, it is necessary to define what animal byproducts are. They are regulated by, as you can see, Regulation 1069 of the 2009, the so-called Animal Byproduct Regulation, or ABP regulation, and the implementing measures, which describes how these animal byproducts have to be processed, managed, and controlled also by official control authorities, is the Regulation 142 of the 2011. As you can see, the definition is here reported. So animal byproducts are any part of an animal or derived products which are not intended for direct human consumption. So there are some examples like carcasses, organs, blood, milk, and so-called derived products, which are products obtained from using animal byproducts as, let's say, ingredients to produce them. Some examples I think maybe we'll see also later in the presentation are, for example, fish meal, fish oil, gelatin, collagen, as we have seen in the previous presentation, but which are not intended anymore to be destined for human consumption. So even if they comply with Food Hygiene 1 and 2 regulation, if the animal byproducts status is acquired, there is no possibility for them to be used for food production. The ABP regulation provides some general rules, such, for example, the HACCP requirements as defined in the Food Hygiene Regulation 1, of course, in this case applied to the manufacturing and processing and distribution of animal byproducts. But what is most important to know at the beginning is the classification of these animal byproducts. As you can see, there are 3 categories divided from the first one to the latest one according to their degree of risk. So the category 1 includes the materials which have the highest degree of risk, which, for example, materials which are suspected or are infected by prions, other materials, other agents responsible for transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. Category 2, which is not really pertinent for our topics, is it includes more animal byproducts such as manure and feces, as you can see, or other animals which cannot be more used, but there are a specific a particular condition which does not apply to our situation. And the most important category, which is also relevant for the valorization of these animal byproducts for other uses in other supply chains, is the category 3. So this includes, as I said before, some products such as fish meal, fish oil, and so on, or also whole animals, which for different reasons cannot be destined for human consumption. In fact, I provided a specific focus on category 3 animal byproducts. So they derive from manufacturing of food products. For example, in the fish sector, the heads, the skins, and other parts obtained from fishing manufacturing, for example, the production fillet, the residual parts of cutting of fish used for the manufacturing of fillets, if not valorized and if not preserved within the food supply chain, should be necessarily considered as animal byproduct, even if they are compliant with the provisions of food hygiene and the general food law. It is enough to remove these products from the food supply chain that the status, the condition of animal byproduct is acquired by these materials. As I said before, also aquatic animals or their parts, even if there are no signs of diseases which are transmissible to humans or other animals, are also considered as such, as animal byproduct. Yes, in fact, I remember correctly that I provided some examples, not only of which what may be considered as such, but also a potential destination of uses. These are regulated, are included by Article 33 of ABP regulation. You can see there are, for example, animal feed, fertilizer and soil improvers, cosmetic products, medical devices, medicinal products, veterinary medicinal products, and fuels, different kind of fuels, and also other derived products. To use animal, sorry if I repeat animal byproducts too much, ABPs, to use ABPs as ingredients to obtain these derived products, it is necessary to comply with the requirements of the, it is important to comply, to reach, the so-called endpoint of manufacturing chain. So the regulation states that it is necessary to reach this specific status, this specific point in the manufacturing chain, which is different for each kind, for each type of processing. So the production of animal feed have a different endpoint than the production of cosmetic products. It is necessary to verify between the two regulations. To regulation, I mean the ABP regulation, the specific regulation. For example, the cosmetic products is regulated by 1223 of the 2009. So when the two, the provisions of the two regulations comply, it is possible to determine where the endpoint is reached. Organic fertilizer and soil improvers have particular provision, since there is a delegated regulation adopted in the past year, the delegated regulation 1605 of the 2023, sorry, that include the specific provisions for to say when the endpoint of manufacturing chain is reached in the production of this product. It was not stated before, since there were some particular requirements included in the regulation of fertilizer and soil improvers, and for this reason were lately provided thanks to this regulation. So it's now possible to not be compliant with the specific provision of animal byproduct regulation, but to obtain fertilizer and soil improvers according to the dedicated regulation, and commercialize products, labeling them as such. Before this dedicated regulation, fertilizers and soil improvers were considered only as animal byproducts. I reported, as you can see, different examples of fish animal byproducts, which may be used as materials to obtain these products. For example, fish oil and especially fish meal are the most interesting BPs from fishery products. We may dare to say that maybe fish meal has even higher value than the fish itself, the market value, since there is a lot of side stream obtained from the manufacturing of fish products, between 50–60%. And for cosmetic products, here, okay, I'm sorry, I was checking for a thing, but I will describe why it is not present. For example, for cosmetic products, collagen and gelatin, as you know, they may be used as ingredients for creams or other cosmetic products for skincare. You know, I was checking for a food supplement, but of course, if animal byproducts regulation exclude from its scope of application foods, so it's impossible to use them for the manufacturing of food products, food supplements cannot be included in the list. These are some examples of what the implementing measures that are described in the Regulation 142 of the 2011. So the ABP regulation gives the structure, the skeleton of the provisions that need to be complied with, but the Regulation 142 of 2011 gives the specific provision that are needed to obtain, to market ABPs which are safe for the human health, animal health, and for the environment. Some example of requirements are the documentation. So it is important that each transfer of ABPs between an operator to another is accompanied with a specific documentation, which is mainly the official certification or commercial certification, commercial document, and in some specific cases it may be required the use of the health certificate. As required in the General Food Law, also in ABP regulation, is important to apply a traceability system that permits to these ABPs to be tracked from the starting point, in this case, so where the ABPs are generated, up to their destination, which may be considered as the endpoint of the manufacturing chain. Whether these ABPs have to be exported or imported from third countries or from the European Union to third countries, it is necessary to ask authorization obtain the notification from competent authorities, or if there is transit, so these ABPs pass from a member state and goes or comes from a third country. Also, in the registration and approval requirements also apply here. So it is necessary, according to the specific case, to ask to national competent authorities to be registered or approved for their facility plans, but also for other kind of, let's say, companies. For example, universities need to be registered even if they have to use animal byproducts for scientific purposes, but also in the case of food industry or other kind of industry. So there is no possibility, let's say like this, there is a mandatory requirement for all operators who handles animal byproducts to be registered or to be approved. Okay, according to the classification that I shown at the beginning, it is also necessary to mark the boxes or the vehicles which are used to transport ABPs, specifically describing which kind of category is the specific kind of animal byproducts category. And for each one, it is necessary to associate a specific color. For example, category 1 is black, category 2 is yellow, and category 3 is green. Okay, when a food product is processed, as I said before, there is the possibility that some residual side streams are obtained. I said also that it is possible to destine them to food production, for example, to use skin to obtain collagen or gelatin. But it is necessary that the following phases of manufacturing and processing of these skins are aligned to the are contained also within the food supply chain. So the same operator or mainly different operators need to be registered or approved as food business operator. So it is enough that the following activities are performed by operators which are not registered or approved as food business operator, in order to classify the side stream as animal byproduct. But it may also happen that these operators decide for some reason to throw away or to not process these ABPs for other uses. In this case, it is the choice of the operator to obtain animal byproducts, which are, of course, have to be managed according to the specific provisions. In the other case, in the other examples that I explained and I shown before, animal byproducts are defined by law, since they are moved and they are transferred to what is considered as a non-food business operator. So, for example, the manufacturer of food cosmetic products, feed products, and the other kind of example that I've shown to you before. In fact, the classification of animal byproduct is irreversible, and when the decision is made by the operator, it is not possible to come back. This is a scheme that I've prepared, a decisional tree that I prepared, of course, in a simplified form that may be useful to define whether a product of animal origin may be classified as food or as animal byproduct. So there are some questions that are needed to be answered too. As you can see, if the product, okay, I forgot to specify an important passage, but I will describe it now. Dario said before that Article 14 of General Food Law states whether a food may be considered a risk for the health. So it may be injurious, or it may be unfit for human consumption. If the food is considered as injurious for human health, it cannot be considered as category 3 material. There is some, yes, there is a little mistake here. It may be considered as animal byproduct, but it should be determined whether it is category 1 or category 3. If it's not injurious or unfit for human consumption, if the material does not leave the food supply chain, as I said before, it may be considered as food. There is an additional passage here that I wanted to describe, that is the status of novel food. I don't know if you know what a novel food is. It is a food that has not history of safe consumption within the European Union or one of its member states before after the 15th of May of the 1997. But before this date, the novel food regulation does not apply. In this case, in fact, it is considered as not novel food. It may be the case of fish oil, fish meal that are regulated by the general the Food Hygiene Regulation 2. But even if they are not considered as not novel food, for example, if we introduce an enrichment of their nutritional value, if there is a novel food process and other changes that may be included in the novel food regulation, even the same food product may be considered and comply with the novel food regulation and need a pre-market authorization. To go back to the animal byproduct status, the only case where they may be considered as waste is when they're intended to be disposed of. So if we decide to throw away, to dispose of animal byproducts, this is the only case where they are considered as waste. But before this, they're only considered as ABPs. When used for the production of derived products, according to their status, they may be classified within one of the three category materials that we have seen before. And I think this is the conclusion of the presentation, if I don't remember wrong. This is another short, let's say, example of what may be the destination of products of animal origin according to their status. It's similar to the example that I presented before, but I also introduced the possible destination of uses, which are food products or food supplements, even if they are not novel food or they are novel food, or for category 3 material, it is possible to use the intermediate products, which are a sort of pre-processed animal byproducts, to obtain cosmetic ingredients. And that's it. This is the consortium of the EcoeFISHent projects, and you can see the different partners, which include also NIGE, TICAS, us, in the form of Wiise, and other partners, mainly from Liguria, but also other part of Italy and the European Union and third countries. Stop to share.